George looks up from his book, realizing that he's been reading for more than an hour. He jumps up and gets on the phone for a conference call. Shit, he mutters to himself. He frantically searches around the house for a phone. He finally sees it, almost jumps on it, but then realizes that's a stupid choice and settles for grabbing it. His thumbs flying, he dials up the number and barges in on the call like a very sheepish bull. He apologizes and tries to make it somewhat less awkward for him and his coworkers. The call goes on for a few hours. It's a miserable night, raining, dark, and cloudy. So cloudy, in fact, that the only light illuminating the streets are the street lights. George is watching the latest episode of some soap opera. He doesn't care much for the story, but finds some of the characters quite interesting, particularly the one who was orphaned as a child. He thinks that is, perhaps, because he can relate. He's laughing at a part where a child is asking their mother where babies come from, but realizes he'll be answering that same question in a few years. Turning the television off, he gets ready for bed. He changes into his pajamas, brushes his teeth, and washes his face, deciding that he can hold off shaving until the morning. He is just about to climb into bed when he realizes he hasn't checked the mail today. Looking in his mailbox, he finds some flyers and bills and the like, but all of them look somewhat weather-worn. He realizes the mailman left the mailbox open again and ponders putting a sign up, but then something catches his eye. One of the envelopes looks almost fresh and much less wet than the others. Inquisitively, he looks at the envelope to see that it's been tucked away nicely. Examining the envelope further reveals no address, stamp, or return address. His interest piqued, he rummages through the kitchen until he finds a letter opener. Once he finds one, he tears open the letter, and several pages, neatly folded together, fall on the floor. Kicking himself for his clumsiness, he takes a look at the sheets of paper on the ground to find the bunch held together by a string. Breathing a sigh of relief, he takes the letter opener and cuts the string. Looking at the pages, he notes erratic handwriting. It looks quite neat and very well written in some places, messy and seemingly rushed in others. He wonders if the letter was written by different people, or just simply written over a period of time, and if the writer was feeling different things at different parts of the letter. He looks over the letter, contemplates it, and begins reading. Hello. It's been a long time, hasn't it? My, you've grown. Just look at you. Getting older, more grown up, more mature. Feeling older too, I'm sure. How old are you now? 40 or so? Don't worry. You're not that old, and in the near future, you won't be getting much older. Now, George, how long has it been since we've seen each other? Maybe 40 years? All right. You wouldn't remember, of course. You were just an infant. A small babe in a nice family. And if I remember correctly, you spent the rest of your life in an orphanage, at least until you were 16 and could move out. Oh, your friends. They got adopted. But never you. People didn't want to adopt you. You were tied to something. And even though it fell out of people's minds, whenever they saw your name, they'd remember. George Stevenson, the son of the big shot. But you lived in an orphanage, right? That can't be true. George Stevenson, the no-name orphan, is who you are, what you are, right? Well, George, I have something to tell you. You see, at the orphanage, they never told you what happened to your family. They said that they left you on the doorstep. They said the father abused you as a baby, which does explain the scars on your stomach. They told you that you were in a car crash and your parents died. They tried telling you nearly every story, except for some. Included in those few stories that they withheld was the truth. I've never been to an orphanage, but I think that I have a general idea about how it was there. Crowded children in tight spaces with few toys to play with, creaky floors, and boring wood walls all painted white. A rat's nest that they never bothered to clean out. When it was time to sleep, you were in a cot next to 20 other cots. I bet you slept next to the bully in there who, in the middle of the night, would wake you up just to slap you. But it wasn't all bad. You slept near your friends every night. You had your teddy and a few toys until said bully took them and flushed them. I imagine that you would have gladly traded your childhood with another little boy. You would have loved to have had an actual family instead of sitting in the orphanage and waiting to be adopted. But you never were. You just kept on asking where your parents were. Don't worry. I'll answer that soon. I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself yet. How rude of me. Here I am talking about your life when I haven't even hinted at mine. Now let's see, where to begin? Oh, I know. Perfect. I, like you were led to believe of yourself, am a victim of abuse. My father would frequently hit me for doing things wrong, and not just a spank type slap. It was as hard as he possibly could. The full force of that usually would knock me down, and if it didn't, he'd just hit me again. Not only that, but sometimes, if I was acting out, such as talking back or crying, he would wrap his hands around my neck and start strangling me until I couldn't breathe. I'd stop crying then. Not because my life hung on the balance, but because with the air cut off from my lungs, I didn't have a choice. When I told my mother, though, she didn't decide to put a stop to it. She decided to join in on the fun. And then it got worse. I had to do horrible, awful things. And they did horrible, awful things to me too. I ran away when I was 15. I don't know how you feel about my situation, but I know I would have loved to switch places with you. As a homeless child, I couldn't spend the night in shelters. Most of them wouldn't take me unless I had a parent or guardian with me. I should be a parent from the previous paragraph. I would rather have died than gone back to my parents, though. They were awful, horrible fuckers. Even 40 years later, I'm still bearing the scars from those shits. And for a while, I was fine living out on the streets. I fit right in with the homeless, and looked as if I'd been on the streets for a while. What with all of the scars, tattered clothes, dirty face, bloody, rotting teeth. But then the incident happened. I took part in an illegal bum fight. Now this wouldn't be so bad if it didn't happen to be the fact that the hobo I was fighting was a dirty old fucker with some sort of physical defect, it seemed. It looked like he needed medical attention, but because of the healthcare hinging on a person's fucking wealth, he was forced to just deal with it. I fought and scratched and bit and screamed. I took a huge knock-up in that fight, but gave an even worse one back. Whenever he let his guard down, I'd punch him as much as I could, wherever possible. Because my parents were the fuckers they were, I'd grown decently skilled at fighting people off who were much bigger than me. It helped that what little weight I had on me at that time was muscle. After he started to get wheezy and tired, I really attacked him. I took a few light punches at him, but then I put one well-placed punch right in the chest. He was out cold. But even worse, because he was so old, and because of his possible defect, his heart stopped. I felt it stop, right on my knuckles. I loved every moment of that punch, and will continue to relive it until the day I die. The large crowd that had formed began cheering. That lasted until some guy realized and called out that he wasn't breathing. Total chaos ensued, some calling me a cold-blooded murderer, others calling 911, others running away in blind panic. When the cops arrived, they identified me. They put me in a restraining order and into juvie. Since my parents had put out an Amber Alert, I was returned to their custody. They also asked that they have a week with me before the trial started and pretended to be all caring. But once we got home, I was given the worst punishment of my life, worse than anything the cops could administer, worse than jail for life. I was beaten, punched, kicked, and tied to the basement banister. They proceeded to stab my breasts and nipples with thumbtacks. They then untied me and left me for dead in the basement with a broken wrist, jaw, and multiple teeth missing. After lying there for several minutes, I managed to pick myself up off the ground and attempt to walk. I stumbled, but my body's natural painkillers started to kick in. I hobbled up the basement stairs, pain shooting up me with every step. Getting to the last step, I turned a corner and found a steak knife hanging on the wall, where it always is. I looked around the kitchen I had just stepped into and found nothing out of the normal order of things. Grabbing the knife and twisting my face into a small grin, I limped to my parents' room. I slowly, silently opened the door and found them asleep, or at least pretending to be. I snuck in and found my father. As he was sleeping, I stuck the knife into his throat. Oh, what a beautiful sound it made. Such a beautiful, awful sound. I drove the knife carefully into his larynx so he couldn't scream, so that he couldn't wake my mother. To my mother, though, I did something else, something far more brutal. Using the knife carefully, I stabbed each eye once and shoved the weapon into her mouth and down her throat. I'm sorry if I'm rambling. These are the most vivid memories of my life, and finally getting to share them is not something I've done before. I'm just imagining your reaction now. Your face twisted into a horrified grimace, you holding the letter as far away as possible. Let's see, now, where should I finish this? As for names, I know yours, George Stevenson. I'm not sure you know mine, though. Let's see, how shall I put this? I'm the woman who has remained unfound for nearly 40 years. Oh yes, they all gave it their best shots, but nobody caught me. Since it would be suicide to reveal my name to you, as you will surely give this to police as evidence, I'll ask you to refer to me as what the papers throughout the town refer to me as. A killer. A cold-blooded, unmotivated murderer. I didn't take your life then, but only through an accident on my part, and incredibly low odds being surpassed on yours. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I suppose that I should tell you what really happened. You see, the night I had done that, I planned to kill myself as well. I had planned to end my life as soon as I stabbed my parents. But I couldn't. With this wonderful new sensation, I couldn't let my life go to waste. I had to have more of it before I died. And that night, across the street from my house, was yours. I stabbed them. I snuck into your parents' house and fucking stabbed them. It was a great feeling to steal away the life of another. It was beautiful. So beautiful. My heart was beating faster than NASCAR, and damn, it was loud. I couldn't hear for shit when I did the act, but now I remember vaguely hearing their screams and their cries, begging me for mercy. But my parents never gave me mercy when I screamed and cried. They only hurt me worse. So why should I be any different? When I saw in the daily press, I was checking the publicity the murder had so far. I was astonished to hear that you were still alive, albeit in an unstable condition. I screamed with rage. I couldn't believe I had let one of my victims survive. I had failed to kill a baby, an infant, so small it couldn't understand what had happened. I was sure I was done for, but then I realized you couldn't speak. You couldn't remember me. I followed your story every day since then, wishing I had finished the job. I suppose you're worried for your life now. I know that you're thinking, why should I trust a crazy psycho like her? But I will go on with my memories, and you will go on with your life. One problem, though. My memories are getting a bit hazy, and I think that one more round will be just enough to restore them to crystal clear. Hope you've locked your door. After cashing the checks, money orders, and such, I returned to the office to get down to business. I have made quite a profit selling gas masks and protective gear. Business is good. After putting part of the money in the safe and in the cash box, I look over to the stacks of orders. There are 2 orders in what I like to call the exempt pile. One order included an explanatory message saying that the customer thought it might be prudent to get a mask because there had been a couple of disasters near where she lived. I can sympathize. The other is from a guy saying he didn't care about any special features. He just wanted a cool mask to wear to an upcoming party. That's fine by me. It even strikes me as a little amusing for some reason. I take care of those orders first, carefully packaging the masks and making sure to set them apart from the others. After that's done, I tally the number of orders in the other stack, what I call the special orders pile. Once I'm sure of how many masks I'll need to prepare, I fetch the required number and bring them into the back room to begin the process. Safety is the primary thing. First, I inspect my gloves and apron, and finding no flaws, I put them on. Then I don my best gas mask and make sure it's working as it should. With everything in order, I take one of the masks from its container, grab one of the jars from off the shelf, and get to work. I pride myself on the thoroughness with which I work. By the time I'm done working on a mask, it's like the poison is bonded to the rubber, plastic, filters, at the molecular level. Most customers wear the masks at least once. After all, the first thing most people do when they get a mask is try it on, and every inch of skin in contact with the rest of the mask absorbs poison through the sweat glands. Even if the customer doesn't wear the mask, he or she just keeps it in storage in the house, the poison can still take effect. The poison is very strong, and I take the liberty of poking tiny, nearly imperceptible holes in the bags I place the masks in, before wrapping and packaging them. Poisonous fumes escape the bag and seep into the house, so chances are good the customer will still be poisoned to some extent. If the customer has ordered a complete hazmat suit, I hedge my bets by contaminating that too. Once the customers have sufficient amounts of the poison in their systems, they begin to succumb to paranoia and death. Some suffer cardiac arrest or respiratory failure. Others are driven to commit murder-suicide due to paranoia. It's easy for me to find obituaries, police blotters, and news articles, so it's simple to find the fates of the majority of my customers. There was a report from a nearby town of a man who went insane and shot his family members to death before taking a fatal dose of pills and booze. There was also an incident in another city of a woman who was shot to death by police after she took a gun and wandered through the streets raving and making violent threats, a case of unintentional suicide by cop. I checked my customer list against the police blotters and news reports. Sure enough, they were both on the special orders pile list. Sometimes I can tell beforehand that the poison is doing its work. For instance, there was a customer who, a couple of weeks after receiving his mask, requested 5 more masks making all sorts of claims about why he needed them. I could tell from the bizarre claims he made that he was deep into the paranoia stage. I told him not to worry, that I would send him the new shipment of masks expedited delivery at no extra cost, since he was such a good customer, and please let me know when the shipment arrived. 2 days after he contacted me to let me know it had arrived, I read his obituary. They speculated that it was stress that had caused his fatal heart attack. Funny stuff. The more people die, the more fear is generated. The more fearful and paranoid people become, the greater my sales. After the guy who ordered 5 additional masks had his heart attack, several of his friends and relatives ordered masks from me. This thing had them shaken, they said, that they would feel safer with something which could provide them with a little extra security, because you never know what might happen in life. I told them I understood completely and that I would give them the exact same service I gave him. After the news reports of the woman who was shot by police, and of the man who killed his family, I searched and found the advertising offices for the newspapers in those cities. I placed an ad in each one, and after that, my sales in those cities took off like a rocket. Many of the customers I gained from those 3 incidents have already died, and more are on their way there. The cycle continues as the process constantly replicates itself. Yep, business is good. The letter was found the next day, I tell you. The next fucking day. You can't tell me that's too old for this case. I covered my ears. Daddy was yelling at his lawyer friend again. I don't know what letter he was talking about, but I wanted to help. Daddy says if I help, then he'll take me out to get ice cream. So for a couple of days when I get home from the bus, I'll check the mail. If there was letters in there, then I would take each of them to my daddy and have him look at them. After about 2 days, he said I had found it. I want my mommy. I want her even more than I want ice cream. Daddy says, Mommy's not coming back. Okay. His face gets a little sadder when he hears that. I still want my ice cream. I think I'll get peppermint flavored. Daddy was yelling again, but all I did was ask for ice cream. I want to know when I get my ice cream. Now I want it Superman flavored. I ran up to my room and shut the door, like I saw Mommy do. I didn't see what happened next, because Daddy told me to clean my room, and that if I didn't, he wouldn't give me my allowance. I'm in my room. I've been in here for a while. I'm just laying on the floor by my teddy bear. Daddy still isn't coming. I can hear him shouting at his lawyer friend again about the letter I found. I'm scared. I heard him saying, "Fine, I'll read the letter." Then his voice became quieter and softer. He even started falling asleep. I was awoken by a sharp bang. I got off the floor, ran downstairs, and saw my daddy on the ground. He had a little hole in his head. Mommy was standing over him. "Mommy!" I ran over and hugged her, but then a question arose in my mind. "Mommy, what did you do to Daddy?" She got down on her knees. "I just collected his life insurance." I was only off my meds for a day. Perhaps a bit longer? Let me try and remember. That's what you asked, right? What I was in for? Yeah, my husband. He went down the mountains to find me more meds. I don't work well without them. I get all jittery. It probably wasn't a good idea to stop taking them anyhow. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but the visions started pretty soon. At first it was minor. Maybe I heard a creak, the wind, something gets dark outside, someone comes through the wall missing his head, the usual. You seem sort of nervous, stranger. Why? Don't get freaked out. It'll get worse. Now, where was I? Soon these visions began growing restless and violent. They'd push me around, claw at my arms, begging me to love them. The voices sounded so familiar, too. Oh, I do remember one time. You're gonna love this. I imagined there were bugs all over my arms and, well, let's just say I ended up needing a skin graft. I notice you're not laughing. No matter. On with the story. So yeah, the hallucinations were pretty goddamn terrifying. I started to scream and cry pretty quick. When they cried, I cried, so I hit 'em. Hit 'em hard. Till they bled, I think. They wailed and wailed, begging me to stop. Now, no need to start crying. This is all just build-up. Like I said, it's gonna get much worse. Anyway, they were pretty persistent. I really needed my meds, so I figured I'd do something drastic. I mixed some junk and downed it. Did it help? I don't know. The knives surely did. Oh God, how they wouldn't go down. Anywho, I just started running at them with the knife. Somehow I ended up naked. It felt good if you're wondering. What do you mean, what do I mean? You know what I mean. Sorry, the wink was unnecessarily unprofessional. Anyway, after that was done, I decided it was time I got some well-deserved rest. I sort of finished myself off before I dozed off, if you know what I mean. Is the vomiting really necessary? It's not that gross. How do you think I felt? The knife was awful. I see your point. Anyway, by the time I awoke, my husband's return was still a ways off. I was famished, so I went into the back to kill some pigs. I found 2 nice and plump pigs, crafty little buggers they were. The screeches were oddly human-like. They could talk too. Obviously a hallucination, though something still throws me off. They screamed that they thought I loved them, and that they were confused as to why I would do such a thing. I told them they were pigs, and piggies shouldn't talk. Oh, but here comes the kicker. Oh, don't bother trying to yell out the bars. It's not like a god would swap you out anyway. I'm surprised. What are you even in for? No offense, but you seem like a wuss. 2 months for some lousy parking tickets? That's bull. Anyway, I couldn't hold myself anymore. Before I could even get to the oven, I cut open one of them and ripped out the ribs. Succulent, very bloody, but still undeniably delicious. Licked the meat clean off. Got into the stomach, kidney, even the liver. Partially the tongue and brain. No response this time, huh? Well, I do agree. I haven't said anything that's too disturbing this time around. Oh, I ate like a beast. Messy, too. No knives, no plates. Just me on the floor ripping apart and gulping down those little baby piglets. You seem disturbed. Oh, don't tell me. You figured out the kicker yet, stranger. Anyhow,
I was awoken to a screech. My husband returned and was no doubt adamant about the mess I made of my dinner. He was overreacting. It's just some pigs. He dropped all his stuff and ran out of the hut hollering profanities and mortified ramblings. I took my meds and waited for them to set in. After about an hour in my bed, and after about a nap on a full gullet, I figured I'd finish my meal and clean up. I came down just in time for the police to break in my door and handcuff me. I was confused, but I got a glimpse of what I had really done. Looks like those hallucinations weren't completely fabricated. Well, if it's any consolation, my children tasted delicious. So that's my story. How'd you like it? Stranger? I'll need to talk to the orderlies. It seems my new friend has yet again returned to the shadows of my mind. Maybe it's the white padded cell. It's driving me insane, giving me these horrid, confusing episodes of culpability. Yes, it must be that.
I am a horror junkie through and through. While most of my friends gravitate towards different genres of film, I am firmly in favor of terrifying movies. Horror is the perfect genre. The good is good, and the bad is, well, good in my opinion. From Argento to Ty West, I have seen it all and made my opinion known online. I frequent horror sites as well as peruse Reddit horror, always looking for that new thrill. What I have discovered in light of the events that I am about to unfold, my thirst for the macabre begins and ends with celluloid. It all began with an email I received last Tuesday. My inbox is full of offers and spam from the various horror sites that I have registered to. However, something about this email stood out. It was so effectively creepy and off the wall that it immediately piqued my interest. I have it posted below for reference. Dear blank, you're as welcome to come to 2486 Dearlocked Lane. I, director of Vain Death, will screen my new movie and be a question answers. Features are meaning. Life is propagation of blood. Blood is best. Blood is good, and blood is all. Life force and want subjugate themselves to willpower and the letting. Next Thursday at midnight. Sincere, Petru Beklia. This email blew my mind on many accounts. Right off the bat, I knew that address. That cinema had shut down years ago. When I was a child, it was the budget cinema for my area. It used to play movies that had left theaters but had not quite made it onto VHS yet. But also, it would frequently have festivals. Namely, horror festivals would screen there when I was too young to secure a ticket. Also, the awful grammar and bizarre nature of the email made me excited that I was going to see something new and different. Given the name of the director, which I googled to no avail, I was expecting some warped Eastern European shit, a la a Serbian film. I talked to all of my friends, and none were interested. Forwarding the email to many of them had the opposite effect I had intended. They pointed out how weird the whole thing was and that the theater had shut down years ago. Also, they mentioned how there was no trace of this guy anywhere on the internet. Despite their protests, I was too intrigued to not go, which, in retrospect, was the worst decision of my life. I drove to the theater 2 days ago by myself, arriving promptly at 11:50. I immediately began to regret my decision. The theater was in a very secluded area of my town. It was a small oasis of concrete in the middle of a heavily forested area. As I pulled up to the theater, I was immediately alarmed by the lack of vehicles in the lot. I was literally the only car pulling into the parking lot. As I exited my vehicle, I surveyed the entrance to the theater. It had seemed abandoned. It was pitch black inside. It was abundantly clear that it hadn't been maintained in years. This all added to the creepy ambiance I was hoping for the evening, but something about this really screamed foul. I turned to return to my car. That is when the lights turned on in the cinema. I decided to go through with it. My curious nature was getting the better of me as I strolled up to the seemingly neglected building. I was almost surprised that the door gave way, emitting an ominous creak as it provided me entrance. I entered to find the box office abandoned. Confusion began to set in until I saw that the marquee on Theater 1 was illuminated. Letters were arranged above the theater to indicate that Vain Death was indeed screening in there. I was hoping to buy some popcorn, having not eaten that evening, but there was nothing but cobwebs manning the concession stand. I convinced myself that the abandoned cinema look was all part of the ambiance that the theater was trying to establish for the screening. I entered Theater 1. Inside, I saw it was empty and sparsely lit. I took a seat in the back and marveled again at the lack of maintenance therein. This place could really use a renovation, I considered. Then I surmised that this place must exclusively exist to screen obscure horror films, and the mood was definitely set by its current condition. I looked around the dark theater to realize I was the only one seated in the auditorium. Then the film began. The addition of the faint light emanating from the screen informed me that I wasn't alone. A man in a black suit entered the auditorium and took a seat in the front row. I assumed this was the director and actually pitied him since only one person had attended the screening of his film that he must have worked so hard on. Not that I was expecting previews or a cavalcade of production companies to begin the film, but my thoughts scattered as the movie started almost immediately after a brief countdown. The movie began with a stationary shot and no setup whatsoever. It was of a camera sitting in the corner of a bedroom, pointed toward a man and a woman having a conversation. My immediate thought was that the sound quality on this movie was abysmal. This is an understatement. I had to focus as hard as I could to make out what was being said. To say I understood a quarter of the words spoken is being generous. Also, the film quality was extremely subpar, and the positioning of the camera was way too far away from the action, as well as out of focus. It was jarring, to say the least, to see such shoddy filmmaking, but I gave the director the benefit of the doubt. This could be the mood he was trying to invoke, a grainy and poorly mixed film. The conversation between the man and the woman, at first I could barely glean their gender by their voices, combined with the grainy and out-of-focus images on the screen, went on and on. Due to the poor quality of the sound, I could barely understand what was being said. The woman seemed to be sufficiently scared, from what I could gather. She mentioned ropes, which cued me into the fact that she may be tied to the chair. About 5 minutes in, I could hear a baby crying. I noticed that there was what could be part of a crib in the opposite corner of the room. As boredom began to set in, I noticed that the figure in black had moved a couple rows backwards in the theater. It was too dark to be sure, but I was convinced that he was staring at me intently. The conversation continued with the camera remaining stationary. The few words I could make out were actress, movie, amateur, and blood. Lots of mentions of blood was the only thing I could be 100% on. Then the man in the film picked up the camera and moved it closer. As he set it down, he brought it into focus. Things began to become more clear both visually and orally. If anything, now the sound was too loud. The woman was in absolute hysterics, and the baby's screaming screeched through the speakers. The man's voice was clearly foreign, with a heavy Eastern European accent. The shot now just contained the woman as she sat next to the crib, now clearly occupied by a baby. At first I thought, wow, what a great actress. But looking into her eyes, the horror of the situation truly began to dawn on me. This was not acting. At the same time, I couldn't help but notice that the other denizen of the theater was now sitting 2 rows in front of me, his eyes intently staring at me as the action unfolded on screen. The woman began to plead for her baby's life. She repeated that she never signed up for this. She screamed that she was not an actress. The man took the seat next to her. As her cries began to sink in, the veracity of her emotional pleas chilled me to the bone. The man reached into his pocket and grabbed a razor. In one swift movement, he sliced the woman's throat. Blood began to pour profusely from the woman's neck. The man reached in and began to lick the blood gushing from the gaping wound on her neck as he erotically rubbed it all over his now naked person. He stood over her fading body and began to aggressively punch her in the face, as the camera couldn't help but capture the man's now bloody and erect penis. The horror I was experiencing was indescribable, but reached unimaginable heights by what I witnessed next. The man, naked and covered in blood from head to toe from the now clearly deceased woman, grabbed the baby from the crib. He held it longingly and gazed into its perfectly innocent eyes and kissed it on the forehead. In one fell swoop, the man grabbed the infant by its legs and swung it around while moving off camera. Until my dying day, I will be thankful I did not see the baby's head make contact with the brick wall. But the sound is indelible and will remain with me forever. It was the unmistakable pop and crackle of a bone breaking, followed by a slight hissing noise, which I could only assume was pressure allowing the brain to exit its formerly sound sanctuary. The horror of all this had kept me glued to my seat and my unwavering eyes staring at the massacre playing out on screen. As I finally brought my gaze down to see where the other man in the theater was, he was nowhere to be found. I couldn't help but look back up towards the screen to see the man covered in blood and brain matter approaching the camera with unblinking eyes. His gaze was incredibly blank, but had the unmistakable taint of insanity and indifference. Evil. That is when I felt the breath on the nape of my neck. I turned around to see the man in the theater was the same person on the screen. Wordlessly, he stared at me with those same depraved eyes, his eyes alive and wanton. He reached over the seat and began to place something in my pocket. I was literally frozen in place, too frightened to move or react. Beholden to my fear, I accepted whatever he placed in my pocket. He quickly exited the theater, and I was left alone. As the movie remained in the same stationary shot as the murderer had seemingly left the scene, I decided I was going to get the fuck out of there. I made a beeline from the lobby, out the entrance, and into my car. I didn't have the courage to read the note the director had put in my pocket until I got home. It reads, "I am happy you enjoy my film. Shooting of my next feature, Vain Death 2, begin at 8:00 p.m. Saturday. For movie to be real, I appreciate having amateur actors and look forward to working with you. Blood is good. Blood is God." It is 7:54 right now. The end.